Threat intelligence. It's all about understanding your own strength, while understanding the strength of the hacker. Almost like something SunTzu could have said. Jesper Olsen from Palo Alto Networks and Christoffer Strömblad from TrueSec. They held a popular presentation known as a Focus Evening at Sig Security on the 5th of May. In cooperation with Sig Security, we give you Jesper and Christoffer, and the topic is Threat Intelligence, or How to Win All the Battles. But we need to know them and their expertise first. So Jesper, what's your story?
Well, it's a long one, but I'll try to keep it short and a bit crisp. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor. So yeah, I'm Jesper. I'm currently the Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks, covering Northern Europe, and that means I provide cybersecurity advisories to both large organizations as well as government military entities that we work with in Northern Europe. I have a background of being the CISO in Maersk Drilling for 3.5 years before I joined Palo Alto Networks. And prior to that, I spent a couple of decades, a bit more actually, in the Danish defense and government, working on many different areas in information security, all the way back before it was called something sexy as cyber.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Shortest description I can do.
Yeah, it's a great description. I also have noted that you used to be an MP. What do you call it? Military police.
Yeah, military police officer. That's where I started, getting an interest into security. First, if it was from a physical perspective, I was a bodyguard team lead, did 2 tours of duty as a bodyguard as well. So I was really happy about that part of it. But when I came back, I realized that that's not really a career path to undertake in Denmark. And I had a knack for technology, and someone found out that I was actually quite okay with or should we call it decent with a computer. So they hijacked me for running an IT organization at one of the army barracks. And that's where I started the information security journey.
I must say, I can't see you because you don't have a camera on. It's okay, but I guess you're kind of intimidating now that you've been a bodyguard and stuff.
I must say, though, that I can see Jesper. Hey, Jesper.
Hey, Christopher. Good to see you. I had a lot of fun when in my spare time, I go out to schools and teach about, social media ethics and the risks and dangers that they're exposed to from that angle. And it's quite interesting when I have the introduction slide. I usually say that I'm trained in different types of weaponry. I'm trained in explosive, hand-to-hand combat, and I used to be a bodyguard. That usually gets the attention of the youngsters. But I don't find myself intimidating at all.
All right, we're going. No. We're going on with Christoffer Strömblad. Welcome back, so to speak. You work at TrueSec nowadays. What's happened?
Yeah. What happened?
Yeah.
No, thanks. It's great to be back on. I think it was 2019. It was around the Lock Shields time when we. I think it was the time when we actually won Lock Shields, when Sweden won Lock Shields, which was pretty awesome. So since last, I have switched to the private sector. I used to be in the public, what do you say, a public defender, but not the lawyers type, but defending the public organizations. I used to work for the Swedish police and then the Secret Service for a while, but then I decided that I wanted to go back into the private sector. So I joined TrueSec back in last year, in September last year, and I'm there now to do threat intelligence all the way, baby. So that's what I'm doing. I'm studying cyber attacks. I'm trying to extract knowledge from intrusions and incident response assignments, and working very closely with our security operations center. So yeah, there's been a lot of stuff going on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You're saying that it isn't that often that you're discussing how the actors find their targets. Because before you have an intrusion, the target must be identified.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's when you talk about a cyber attack, there is often a distinct number of phases that an attacker has to go through, and it's quite exciting to talk about the actual attacks when they have occurred or when they are occurring. But one thing that I find is often not discussed is just what you said, Eric, is that how did they actually find their targets? And I find this to be quite an enlightening process to discuss with organizations and people alike. Is that how do I actually get identified as a target? What is it that makes me an attractive target? Why would someone actually attack me? So my idea is just here that it needs to be talked about a little bit more. And there are some interesting concepts which I'm sure we'll get into. But the basic gist of it is that I want to talk more about recon. How will you be discovered? How do you find out your digital footprint? How do you actually get discovered?
So you need to know something about yourself, your organization, and probably how those threat actors work. So how do you get that knowledge?
Well, I don't want to say the easy answer, but the easy answer is that you actually need to start looking at yourself as if you were an attacker. You need to just assume that you're an attacker. So you start reconning yourself. Yeah. You will start by it. And this can get quite complicated because obviously you, as a defender, you know your organization, you know the domain names you have associated with you, you know the IP addresses you have, you know what services and applications, but you have to kind of position yourself in the shoes of an attacker.
Yeah.
And that begins by kind of erasing your mind like some sort of Jedi mind trick, like there is no knowledge. And that's kind of where you need to start. And just say, what's interesting about us? How might we get discovered? One is that you get discovered opportunistically. You have a public service and someone runs an internet-wide scan and you turn up there. That's the one kind of easy way of discovering yourself. So you can begin there, assume that someone scans your IP addresses, or if you have any, that a service gets discovered. That's one opportunistic way of doing it.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, I totally get it. A journey of self-discovery. What do you say, Jesper? Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the biggest, you could say, challenges for any CISO role when they join an organization or they've been in an organization for a very long time. What they tend to find is a very scattered landscape of diverse technologies being used. It is being used for different purposes, depending on the business function that is consuming the services that come out of that technology landscape, right? So just getting that overview can sometimes be a real challenge, but it's definitely a necessity. Today, we have to assume that we've either already been breached or someone is actively trying to find a way to breach us. And the only way you can get a perspective on where would they enter our systems, what were they after, what would be an easy target for them when they breach the systems, not if, when they breach the systems. That requires a bit of what I call the attack surface management perspective, right? Look at how your attack surface looks like, because then you can start having the mitigative measures in place as well on the back end.
That's a great answer. So, Christoffer, if a customer asks you, can I become a target? What would you say?
Again, the easy answer is, well, quite obviously, anyone can become a target. But that is obviously also trivializing the entirety of the threat landscape. Well, everyone can become a target, obviously, yes. But will I become a target? And that's when what Jesper said, one part of it is looking at your external attack surface. Just going back to what TrueSec noticed during 2021 in our threat landscape report, we noticed that a majority of the intrusions or the incidents that we responded to, it's roughly 160, that we investigated in total, roughly 40 to 50% of those began with the exploitation of a public vulnerability. So I'd say, can I become a target? If a customer asks me, can I become a target? I'll say, well, if you belong to the archetype of a company that has a public exposure with known vulnerabilities, it's not a question of if you'll become a target. It's when will you be exploited? When will you be exploited and attacked? So yes, that's what I would answer.
And that would pretty much mean anyone and everyone. And I think that sounds about right. So, Jesper, which is the most likely vector? That is, how will they get to you?
Oh, there are so many different approaches, right? But one thing you do see is we call that initial access brokers. I think we're going to dive into that terminology as well. But one thing we definitely see that the access brokers, those that are penetrating the system first time, they're leveraging very simplistic phishing emails, for instance. That is something that you see in I believe last year's reports, they supported each other with more than 90% of the cases of a breach that occurred from the basic elements of phishing, luring someone into clicking a link, logging in with what they perceive as company credentials, but at a fake site, of course. And the attackers then get all the credentials that they need for that attack. The other vector is software vulnerabilities that has already been disclosed. Proof of concept has probably already been released, and it could relate to the hardware appliances that you're utilizing, so the firmware they are running, or it can be the software applications landscape that you're already utilizing. So I would say, phishing emails, definitely a big threat vector, and the other area is known vulnerabilities.
So, Christoffer, you have a concept with 3 categories: archetypes, vulnerabilities, and reconnaissance.
Yeah, it's, I wouldn't say as much as a concept, but just a way of explaining and categorizing companies to a fairly well-defined group, which exposes a number of characteristics that kind of defines the probability of you being attacked. And not quantifiably, but more of qualifiably will you be attacked if you belong to one of these archetypes. And the archetypes that I have it's made up. I feel it's important to say that, but they have been quite useful, and some actually like them kind of a lot. But the first archetype is based on the opportunistic attacker perspective, and is that if you, and I mentioned this already, if you expose publicly accessible services to the internet and they're accessible by IP address and they have known vulnerabilities, they will be exploited. And that's the archetype number 1. And then we have the more indirect, or no, I shouldn't say the indirect, but remote access services. If you provide a VPN or an RDP service, any kind of remote access software, they will be brute forced. There's a lot of attacks going on them. So if you don't have a second factor authentication, you're just using single factor, that's the second archetype. So the first one is the public exposed vulnerabilities, and the second one is you have remote access remote access solutions using single factor. I won't go into it. There are 5 of them, 5 archetypes. But the gist of it is the remaining 3 becomes more of a targeted attempt. You need to know more about the organization you're attacking. But the first 2 ones are opportunistically accessible, and the remaining 3 are more aligned with targeted attacks.
All right, then I guess you can send them to me, and I can put them in the show notes for the listeners, if that's okay.
Absolutely, of course.
Yeah, okay. So archetypes, that's one thing. Then we have the vulnerabilities and reconnaissance.
Yeah, so the vulnerabilities, it can get quite, I shouldn't say complicated, but it can get involved. But the idea is that you have direct vulnerabilities and you have indirect vulnerabilities. Direct vulnerabilities is, as I've already alluded to, is when they're publicly accessible, you can just scan for them, you can do an internet-wide scan, and you can get access to the actual vulnerable part of an application or service. So that's the direct vulnerabilities. Indirect vulnerabilities is something that requires some sort of intermediate interaction. You might need to have a user clicking a link. You might need to, for a web application, for example, if you're using a shared infrastructure with virtual hosts, you might need to know a domain name where the application or the vulnerable service and application is hosted. So it's indirectly accessible if you have more information. You can't just run an internet-wide scan because it's a shared hosting infrastructure. So you need to provide the virtual host or the host header. So that's the kind of indirect vulnerabilities. Just to differentiate, because that matters when you're doing recon as an attacker. If you don't have that knowledge, the vulnerability won't be discovered. So you can kind of, in that sense, hide vulnerable services by just not having them exposed through a shared infrastructure.
That's 2 out of 3. How do I know which archetype me or my organization belongs to?
Yeah, by doing recon of yourself, but most of the time you kind of immediately know. If you have VPN services, you have any kind of RDP service, you will likely be exposed because they're usually accessible, especially if they're single factor. So you will know that you belong to at least one very popular archetype. But if you the first one, the vulnerability one, you kind of need to recon yourself if you don't actually have that asset inventory, which is, one shouldn't feel bad. A lot of companies don't actually have that knowledge. A lot of DevOps organizations, there's service being put online every minute. So it can be quite complicated. But yeah.
When I started studying about this before I actually entered the security area, so to speak, this footprinting and this trying to do reconnaissance was quite a bit of a challenge because it was a totally new world for me. And I learned about 2 ways of doing it, digitally over the net and physically. Would you say that those 2 are getting closer?
Well, that's actually, it's a very good question. And from some perspective, from one angle, yes, I would say the digital and physical realm are getting closer, obviously, because you have a lot of the physical protective measures around, for instance, surrounding an office building, right? That's digitally enforced. Sometimes it's outsourced. It comes with its own complexity in the technology landscape. Just look at, the access card you need for entering an office building. Maybe you need a PIN code. The camera systems, that's run by another company. Maybe it's a rental building and you lease it together with 20 other companies in that office building, right? So there are many things that make it a lot easier for attackers, especially the opportunistic one that has already seen that there might be challenges with they don't utilize speed gates of this office building. That's a great example. That means we can just follow someone right in, right? If they have different lanyards for their access cards or whatever it might be, they can realize this through either scouring through social media pictures and updates. One of the classic pictures you see on social media, for instance, when you get a new hire, is they take a picture of the all of the goodies that they receive on the first day of office. Quite often, there's a picture of their access card and their lanyard. That's great for an attacker, right? They can use that for social engineering, create a replica, and then they can just tailgate through the office. So in that aspect, yeah, they're definitely getting closer. I also see quite a few of this, and I imagine that you can echo that as well, Christoffer. It's quite easy to go after building infrastructure, like, if you have a camera system, it's not that often it's properly patched. There's often some sort of, leftover, what I call it, leftover privileged accounts in there where you haven't redone the admin password or you haven't protected the access to it, something like that. That's easily exploitable by the attackers as well, right? So many different angles to this, but yeah, I definitely see that it's coming closer. But there's another aspect of this that could be in the physical realm where we have like Internet of Medical Things, right? So now we're starting to see technical devices, digital devices that are connected to our personal health, whether that's insulin pumps or whatever it might be, that really has a significant impact to the individual. If something happens, those two are vulnerable to some sort of attacks, right? There are so many research being done right now, so much research being done right now that relates straight into, for instance, that Internet of Medical Things, because that is so hard to keep updated and patched and a full overview of. Everybody's walking around with it that needs it, right? But it's going to have a significant impact if it's breached. So there are 2 different angles to digital and physical coming closer. One is for the office related, another one could be for the medical arena, right?
Yeah, and robots and whatever. I mean, there used to be a situation, and it wasn't a vulnerability, it was a software error that made an X-ray machine kill its intended patients by simply radiating them too long, for a long duration. So that is a thing, and add malice to this equation, and yeah, you get a problem there.
I just want to add a little comment. We've recently seen, which we don't know if it's a trend or not, but we've seen quite a significant uptick in infected USB drives. And we've had, in the span of just a few weeks, we've had maybe six or seven incidents where customers have received a USB stick, infected USB stick. And we've seen there's some open sources reporting on this, and we're working on providing a similar reporting to this and see if we can collaborate a bit on this. But that kind of blends the because we've always talked about this as a vector, like, oh yeah, someone can come with an infected USB stick, and there's been red teaming assignments, and people have used this approach. But it's actually been quite few examples of this widespread. If it's not just an APT. If it's an APT, it's a different or state-sponsored attack. That has been seen. I mean, obviously, Stuxnet is one of the more classical ones. But this is not an APT or a nation-state-sponsored attack. This is actually a cybercriminal-sponsored attack, which makes it a lot interesting because maybe it's trickled down into the actual cybercriminals' arsenal of weaponry, and they've used this. So we don't know if it's a trend or if it's just an anomaly, but it's still nonetheless very interesting blend of the physical and digital threat.
That is a subject worth a lot of discussion, but we need to go on here. And I'm going to talk about a rather new term called initial access brokers. That is IAB. What's that about?
Well, I do have one view on it, and then Christoffer can always correct me if I'm mistaken in some of it. But what we know from initial access brokers is this is, they're what we call the opportunistic locksmiths, right, to the security world, right? So they try to breach organizations, and they do that by any means possible, but not with the intent of actually utilizing the access that they might obtain themselves. What they really want to do is gather a lot of different types of access, and then they want to sell it off for the highest bidder. So it's one business side of the cyber criminals. And who they want to sell it to, obviously, is those that have the master plan, whether it's a ransomware threat actor or someone who want to disrupt the business operations or the organizational operations of that particular target, right? So initial access brokers is the as it states in the name, someone who obtains the initial access and then brokers it off for the highest bidder. Quite simple.
I really wonder, how would price targeting work there? Are there some price conscious people that just take the cheap ones and really big targets go for exorbitant prices, or how is that going to work?
I think there was an analysis done on the pricing, and it's fairly low, which is a bit scary, you could say. I saw numbers that rated between $50 and up to $5,400, and these are numbers from mid 2020 up to mid 2021, and the median price, I believe, was around $1,000 for access to a network. And with that price, it doesn't really matter for the ransomware threat actors, because that's easily covered if one organization pays a ransom, right? So they're going to pay for whoever they believe in can provide the best access. And of course, they look at the different, and this is where I need your technical backup, Christoffer, as well. But the threat actors that I follow, at least, they look for, how credible is the access? Are we talking about remote execution opportunities here? Do we have straight access to the inner core of the systems that they want to obtain the data from as part of the ransomware attack? Or are they only breaching the outer perimeter? And then you need a lot of work afterwards in the lateral movement inside to find the right asset, right? So I would imagine there are different aspects. Again, I have the business perspective on this. If I were the threat actor, obviously I would pay more for the better access because I can afford it with this business model.
Yeah, I think what I want to add to this is that the initial access broker concept or phenomena is simply I would say a natural evolution of a criminal specialty landscape. I mean, there's so many actors being specialized. You have exploit developers, you have tool developers, and obviously now you also have initial access brokers. So people specializing, threat actors specializing in providing access. Some of the teams or the ransomware groups, they have their own initial access brokers or their own team or group specialized in hacking companies and providing that to the more specialized hacking operations. And some groups are buying complete access Now with the resurgence of Emotet, I think we'll be able to see a lot of threat actors used to buy access from TrickBot and Emotet. And I'm sure that we'll see the same thing again, that actors buy access. Why do the job yourself if you can just buy access from someone? It's a lot more operationally intelligent to do it that way. Why spend time hacking companies and exposing yourself when you can just purchase the access? So I think that we'll definitely see more of it, and it's not a phenomenon that goes away. I think we'll just simply see more of it. My speculation, if I'm allowed to just speculate a little bit, is right now that we have a field of initial access brokers. I believe, and I think we're starting to see this already, is that you have specialized initial access brokers, those that are very good at credential theft against Office 365 or Azure tenants, for example. And then you have very good exploit initial access brokers who specialize in exploiting public vulnerabilities. So you'll get a further diversification of the IAB brokerage, and you'll get more of actors specializing in subfields of it. And it's a natural evolution.
Yeah, of course you do. I mean, this is something we're seeing. The more a market matures, the more it will specialize. That's how it always is. A bit sad, isn't it?
It is sad, but I think, one of the things that I always go to an organization with is you got to look at this from their angle. From their angle, it's a business model, and they're professionalizing their way of doing business. So even though the name actually sort of alludes to that the initial access brokers are the first steps in a campaign, it might very well be one of the later steps, right? Because maybe the threat actor is actually looking at getting 3, 4, 5 different types of access. So they're scouring the market of initial access brokers to pinpoint who's the best. Just like you said, Christoffer, we're going to see that diversification. I don't think you have to speculate much over that. I fully agree with you that is what's going to happen. We're going to see a professionalization around the initial access brokers as well. And the threat actors are going to leverage everything they have at their disposal. And one thing you also see from the initial access brokers that now, when they're successful, they're starting to move into the domain of saying, well, you don't have to pay us, a few $1,000s for the initial access. We'll take 1 or 2% of the ransom paid. And that also builds on the success, right? Because if they're successful in leveraging the access that they got from that initial access broker, they're starting that professional relationship. The other side of it, when we also look at the business model, it also splits the risk, right? So the initial access brokers might be identified in some stages of an attack, but the threat actors is still unknown by the authorities or the organization that is currently under breach. So you can split the risk from their angle as well in detection and response, right?
I think this is amazing to hear. It's crazy, I tell you. First of all, you're talking about insurance. And what's next? Subscription-based initial access?
Why not?
Yeah, why not? I mean, in some ways, we already have the ransomware franchise. So subscription-based initial access that they kind of guarantee you to get a certain amount of victims for a given amount of revenue. Makes total sense. I just want to add a little tiny tidbit of an incident story where we saw like an initial access broker that we are following. And we saw that the first thing they dropped the web shell, and then they started pushing in all of these legitimate remote access services to the server they initially breached. They quickly gathered some credentials from it, and they moved laterally to some servers adjacent to the actual server. And they pushed out more remote access tools. And then they installed some Cobalt Strikes as well. And then it went quiet for a while. But this was quite an interesting target. So it only took about 5 or 6 hours. And we saw another actor coming in and resuming the operations. So it can be quite quick, but we also know that some access we've seen may have been dormant for about 2 years before it started getting used. Because the target wasn't interesting. No one wanted to buy it. But then suddenly someone wanted to buy it, and then operations resumed, and it took only a few hours or days for a full ransomware operation to have concluded. So it can take a long time, but it can also be extremely quick.
Yep, you're listening to IT Säkerhetspodden Podden with the best ghost stories ever. All right, we're gonna wrap this one up. I think this has been great, actually. I actually want you to... Actually? No, I'm not saying that.
Your expectations were so low.
No, actually, they were definitely not.
I'm kidding.
I'm just not good.
Kidding.
Yeah. Okay, but we're going to stop by asking you to tell the future. So we're starting with Christoffer. What does the future look for threat intelligence?
Oh, it's a damn good question, and I am not much for speculating about the future, especially not an entire industry. I will say that it's still a rather immature field, and we'll see a lot of development in the industry. That's for sure. I think we'll see currently there's been a lot of focus on fairly easily productified areas, such as providing threat feeds and indicators, atomic indicators, that kind of services. I hope and believe that as the industry matures in the area of threat intelligence and consumers' perspective of threat intelligence, we'll start seeing more intelligent threat reports. We'll start seeing proper analysis. We'll see the Mandiant style reporting where you actually you get to provide a different perspective, a more strategic perspective, put in the context of the organizations. I hope that that's where we'll go, and that it just won't become a race of products and platforms. That's what I hope. I won't say that that's where we'll end up, because currently it seems like products are winning. So I'm not sure, but that's one thing I hope we'll see more of, is more analysis, human analysis.
So more intelligent threat intelligence, then.
Yeah, perhaps. ITI, that's what I want. Intelligent threat intelligence.
Perfect. All right, Jesper, your point.
Yeah, I have the same hope, I would say, but I believe that we're seeing a shift both in regulators and best practices and guidelines coming out. So forcing organizations to have that risk-based approach to their own security measures and security controls and how they enforce them. And I hope that comes, with a strong threat intelligence feed as well, to use that term. So I hope that we will see organizations in the future, they're going to work with threat intelligence from both a strategic, a tactical and operational, as well as a technical angle. So they can really start utilizing all the knowledge that is already out there, that is already gathered, but also work intelligently with the information themselves, so they can actually be better prepared for what comes next. Because there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to see an increase in the attackers' capabilities. Therefore, the organizations also need to increase their capabilities. And threat intelligence is just something we're not seeing it used quite enough, and not in the proper way still in many organizations. So that's my hope for the future. And I think it is going to come. Just when is future, right?
I just need to say amen to that, first of all. So well put. I too hope that I lost my train of thought here now. I had something intelligent to say, but that intelligence became just threat intelligence, so I don't know.
Yeah. All right. You probably find it somewhere. Okay, I got one last question for both of you. What's up next for you? We're starting with Christoffer, of course.
I who just lost my train of thought, I need to start? No, what's next for me is that I'll continue to further develop the TrueSec intelligence services. That's what I'm here to do. So that's what I'll do. And that really means putting a lot of all of that knowledge that we do have access to, and really systematizing it and providing that to the market in some way. We're not quite sure what the best approach is, but my personal mantra is that a report that is not being used is a useless report. We need to provide intelligence that is actually used, and that means that we need to have conversations, more conversations about threat intelligence. We need to discuss what it is and what makes it useful. So that's what I will be continuing to do for the at least coming months is to continue the discussion, continue to talk about it and see what is it that makes it useful? What is it that companies at the moment or customers believe that it will deliver? And I will try and understand that perspective and help guide them. And I'll do Python programming and I'll do nerdy stuff as well.
Can't forget that. That would be wrong. So Jesper, what's your plans?
Well, I do have a lot of plans, but one thing that sort of supersedes them all is I will continue to advise the organizations that ask me to, or just that I have the opportunity to meet on my main topic of this year, and that is cyber resiliency. So trying to teach them how do you apply threat intelligence is one element of it, right? But I really wanted them to focus on if they have the right capabilities to withstand, detect, and respond to a cyber attack. Do they have the right capabilities to operate while they're under an attack? And do they have the right capabilities to recover from an attack? That is my mantra for this year out. And happy to say I have a few speaking opportunities lined up where I'm going to talk exactly about that. And I'm going to leverage some of the conversation that Christoffer and I had just recently on threat intelligence and pour that in there as well. So hopefully I'll be able to help organizations and companies meet that future that I spoke about just before.
The plan seems to be set for both of you. That's Christoffer Strömblad from TrueSec and Jesper Olsen from Palo Alto Networks. And I'm Erik Salitis, this is IT-säkerhetspodden. Och nu går jag tillbaka till svenska och bara säger att om en vecka, nästa söndag, då har vi något nytt spännande ämne. Ni vet var vi finns.